What if the biggest geopolitical fight of the 21st century isn't just on the battlefield, but in vaults, courtrooms, and bank ledgers? Today we're unpacking a moment that stunned diplomats, enraged presidents, and reshaped global finance: why the European Union abruptly abandoned a plan to use $105 billion in frozen Russian assets, and what that decision really means for Ukraine, Europe, and the future of international law. You've probably heard the headlines. EU leaders agree on a $105 billion Ukraine loan, but what they didn't do, use the Russian money to fund it, is where the real mystery is. And that's our focus today. To understand this twist, we need context, and it goes back to February 2022. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. In response, the EU, G7 and partners froze roughly €210 billion worth of Russian central bank assets held in European jurisdictions. Consilia, that freeze wasn't just symbolic. It was meant to lock up Russia as financial power, immobilizing funds so they couldn't fuel the war. But frozen isn't the same as seized. Frozen does not equal seized. Frozen equals immobilized but still owned by Russia under international law. And that legal distinction makes everything that follows and the EU's recent decision so critically important. By 2024, EU leaders and officials pushed a bold idea. Instead of borrowing money on markets to help Ukraine, why not use the frozen assets themselves to fund Kyiv's war effort and reconstruction? After all, the war had drained Western treasuries, and Ukraine faced bankruptcy. Under the most ambitious proposals, the EU sought to use up to €165 billion, most of those frozen assets, as collateral or capital to raise loans. This wasn't simply spending the cash outright. The plan envisioned issuing European Union bonds, secured against Russian money, and using the proceeds to finance Ukraine's budget for 2026 to 27. The Economic Times: on paper, it looks smart. Ukraine gets guaranteed funding, the EU takes less debt. Russia's money, frozen for years, finally plays a role. Analysts called the plan a potential game-changer. Ukraine's budget deficit was soaring. The IMF estimated it would need over €130 billion just for the next 2 years. And while the US had provided huge assistance, American support was tapering off. The EU wanted to show leadership, but there were deeper implications. Hidden below the surface: Belgium, Euroclear, Euro 185B, other EU states, remainder, WUSF. Almost 90% of those assets were held in Belgium. At Euroclear, a major international clearinghouse. That meant one country, and one institution, stood at the legal and financial front line, and that would soon matter. Fast forward to December 2025, after weeks of negotiation, political pressure, and legal wrangling, EU leaders finally had a deal on a €90 billion $105 billion Ukraine loan, WUSF. But there was a catch: they refused to use the frozen Russian assets to back it. Why? Let's break it down. Legal and international law risks. Many EU leaders feared that seizing or effectively using Russia's assets, even indirectly, would breach norms of sovereign immunity and international law. Russia had already warned that asset confiscation could be seen as an act of war, a casus belli. Anadolu Ajancic, European legal experts, echoed that uncertainty, saying that EU plans lacked a clear legal basis without unanimous backing. Belgium's reluctance: Belgium didn't just sit on these assets. Its financial system would be exposed to potential Russian lawsuits if they were used to back loans. WUSF, Euroclear, could be dragged into court, and Belgium didn't want its banks or economy on the hook. Belgian leaders argued this was an unprecedented step, not taken even after World War II, and could undermine confidence in Europe's financial system. Reddit: fear of retaliation and financial fallout. EU officials also worried that Russia could retaliate by seizing European companies' assets inside Russia, or pursue legal action that would cost billions, far more than the €90 billion at stake. Internews: the result: the EU agreed to borrow money on capital markets backed by its budget, instead of relying on Russian assets. WUSF: this had immediate consequences. Ukraine still gets funding, but with strings attached. Ukraine secures the lifeline it desperately needed funds to pay soldiers and maintain services, but it didn't come from the much-debated Russian assets. The loan agreement stipulates that repayment would only occur if and when Russia agreed to pay war reparations. Russia's position. Moscow repeatedly framed Western asset usage as theft. Putin and his allies framed legal rules and potential seizure as justification for future conflict. Anadolu Ajansk. This matters because the Kremlin loves to use narratives of Western illegitimacy to rally domestic support. EU internal politics exploded. Hungary, Czechia, and Slovakia didn't even support the final package, highlighting deep fractures within the bloc. WUSF. This situation isn't unique. For centuries, financial leverage, especially seizure of assets, has been one of the most explosive moves in geopolitics. After World War II, victorious powers seized assets, but only as part of formal peace treaties. Today's world has no formal peace yet. This is crucial. The EU treats Russia not as an enemy state in formal war, but as a violator of peace whose assets can't just be taken without legal peril. And that's rewriting the rulebook. 3 clear takeaways. So what should we take away from this? 1. The EU didn't block funding, it reinterpreted risk. Europe chose financial caution over legal uncertainty, even in wartime. WUSF. 2. Frozen does not equal seized is a legal line that still holds deep power. International law still protects sovereign assets unless there's clear legal authority to do otherwise. Consilium. 3. This decision signals a new era of financial warfare. States aren't just fighting with tanks and missiles, they're rebattling over definitions of ownership, sanctions, and economic norms. Here's the reality. By refusing to touch the Russian assets now, the EU preserved a powerful future lever, one that could be used only after peace or legal settlement. But it also preserved the illusion of property rights at a moment when global norms are fraying. If future powers begin to disregard asset protections just because states are unpopular or isolated, the entire global financial system, from emerging markets to foreign investment, could unravel. If you found this breakdown useful, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell to stay updated on the geopolitical forces shaping our world. Drop a comment. Do you think Russia's frozen assets should be used now, later, or never? Why? Your voice matters, and we'll highlight the best comments in our next video.